Hello, I'm Marcia Kavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Though no one is paying attention to Louisiana in the presidential campaign, the Senate election has gotten tighter, with several different possibilities for the outcome. We'll take a look. We'll also glance toward Washington, where Congress has considered flood help for Louisiana, and we'll examine good news in affordable housing, strippers suing the state, new airline service heading south, and our Future Watch segment predicts what to expect from this winter's weather. Feeling the heat for us are tonight's Informed Sources. Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources, Jeremy Alford, publisher, LaPolitics.com, Don Ostrom, Channel 12's Future Watch reporter, and Jessica Williams, reporter, The New Orleans Advocate. Over to Jeremy first. And we have a Senate race going on, and we're going to also have a debate. And the sponsor of the debate is Citizens for a Better Louisiana. Is that
it's
the
Council for a Better Louisiana and Louisiana Public Broadcasting.
And so they've determined who will meet the criteria to get on the debate stage.
What a job that was, right? You got 24 people running for this seat. It's the biggest field that we've seen in recent history, and they got to figure a way to carve the field down. So they settled on 5 candidates, and the way they got there is they said that they have to have a legitimate campaign, they have to have raised $1 million, and have to be polling at 5% in an independent poll. And that knocks a lot of folks off the table. I mean, this is a 5-person race it's shaping up to be, but you're not going to see David Duke on that stage. You're not going to see Rob Maness on that stage, who had a very respectable showing in the 2014 U.S. Senate race. But at some point, it's just a disservice to the public to throw 24 people on a stage for an hour, and you can just give each one a couple minutes to talk. Yeah. But at this point in the race, all we've heard about is a sex scandal that's never been independently verified, a Klansman who's getting more national coverage than all of the Senate candidates together, and the policy distinctions are being lost in this discussion. And hopefully, that's where that debate's going to shine, is that it's going to show us where folks stand on important issues, and we'll start to see some distinctions.
Is there any kids' table like there was in the presidential election?
It would be a big kids' table,
right? A huge kids' table. But they just get no opportunity.
No, they don't. And all the forums, all the debates are facing this. How do we hold a proper forum without having so many people on stage? It's a really difficult task.
And so the 5 that we are going to see on stage will be?
The 2 in the quasi-Democratic primary, which is Carolyn Fayard and Foster Campbell, and kind of the 3 lead Republican candidates who are hoping for one of those runoff spots, which is Treasurer John Kennedy, Congressman John Fleming, Congressman Charles Bustani. Even at 5, that's a pretty big field. It's a big stage.
To have been damaged too much by all the rumors a few weeks ago about the book coming out and the bordello and that sort of thing?
Yeah, it doesn't seem to be resonating. I'm not convinced that the rank and file voter even knows that this is an issue in the race. Bustani's top donors and closest allies refuse to believe that this is true. There's been no independent verification. Outfits like the Associated Press have put boots on the ground to try to look into this, and they couldn't verify it. So, given his standing in the polls, it doesn't seem to have hurt him. Now, that's not to say that, if we've learned anything through our years of watching Louisiana politics, is that we know that something doesn't have to be true to show up on a direct mail piece or in a robocall or a commercial later in a campaign, and that may be the case this cycle with this controversy.
So speaking of polls, what are they showing, the latest polls?
The polls are all over the place. I think what they do show is that we're looking at a 5-person field. On the Democratic side, you have Fayard and Campbell kind of duking it out, and they got Mitch Lander, who's backing Carolyn Fayard, and John Bell Edwards, who's backing Foster Campbell, and that makes it difficult for either of them to secure the party nomination, which was, that was one of the critical points for John Bell Edwards last year, is he was able to get the party endorsement, move forward to election, and unite the party. That's just not going to happen this cycle. Meanwhile, I think John Kennedy is probably still the guy who's kind of sitting at the top of the field, just chocked full of votes. But I also think that makes John Kennedy like this piñata that's just like waving in the air, and everybody's got a stick, and they're about to start whacking him and hoping that the votes fall their way.
Well, so far it's really been kind of quiet for the most part in the Senate race, but potentially for the runoff, and assuming that there will be a runoff, there could be a lot more national attention.
Right. The chairman of the National Republican Senatorial Committee told USA Today this week that he's not convinced that the partisan makeup of the U.S. Senate is going to be decided by the December runoff in Louisiana. You know, you hear this and you're like, here we go again. You know, we hear this with every U.S. Senate race, that Louisiana could decide, and if it does, it's going to be a circus here, and they're going to dump all kind of money into the runoff, and you're going to get sick of watching TV. And you know, this is a dream come true for media buyers and a potential nightmare for consultants. But you know, it could happen. You know, we'll have to see. But it's like crying wolf. But it would be fun.
We'll see. But we do assume we're going to have a runoff.
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Let's talk a little bit now, just more, inside the state. There is a continuing disagreement between our governor and attorney general, to the point where one has sued the other as of today. So
this has been a long, ongoing feud that has lasted the entire 9 months of this new term. And the good news is that John Bel Edwards and Jeff Landry got to sit down and have a personal meeting today. The bad news is that walked out wanting to sue each other. so here's the problem now, and there are there's a myriad of things they can't agree on. But the latest to talk about right now is that John Bel Edwards has signed into law, or has signed an executive order stating putting in workplace protections for gays and lesbians and for gender identity. And Jeff Landry refuses to approve any contract that includes that language. So they got together today, and apparently Jeff Landry, the Attorney General, told the governor that if you want me to approve these contracts, you need to sue me. So the governor walks out of his office, goes into a press conference, and says, "I will be happy to oblige." And what strikes me about this is that you got two grown men who cannot come to an agreement on a policy matter, and now there's a lawsuit that's going to be filed by the governor's office that has to be defended, or that the Attorney General's office has to defend itself against. And meanwhile, taxpayers are footing the bill on both sides of this thing, and it's, I don't think we've seen the last of this kind of divide between Edwards and Landry. It's something that's going to last until the end of this term.
Landry's argument is, he says that the governor doesn't have the authority to add that language. From what you know, does he have the authority?
Well, actually, his argument, I think it's interesting that his argument is not a social argument, that he's not arguing that kind of the merits of the actual policy, but rather he's saying that he's trying to follow the legislature's intent, and the legislature just has torpedoed these type of bills year after year after year, which is why the governor had to turn to executive order, and the executive order holds the weight of law. So it's going to be interesting to see where the courts would go with this if they can't decide to work it out on their own.
So meanwhile, 30 contracts, that was the number that I read, remain unsigned.
Right, and we haven't seen those contracts yet, but the governor's office insists that these are critical services and that they're holding things up.
Okay, well, we'll see how this one plays out. Thanks a lot, Jeremy. Okay, over to Jessica now. And affordable housing, we have more of those affordable housing units, according to a recent report, which is good news for renters and for homeowners. But I want to have you first describe to us, what is meant by affordable housing? What are these housing units like?
So there are different standards for different programs, and the affordable housing, the 2,000 units that the city has this year, are a combination of units from HANO, the Housing Authority of New Orleans, the city's direct housing and community development office, and Unity, which is the nonprofit that handles needs of the homeless and of homeless veterans. And different programs have different requirements, but in general, what affordable housing under this plan is defined as is where a resident doesn't have to pay more than 30% of their income towards their household expenses. Now, we know over time, as home values have risen in the city, as rents have risen, but as wages have remained stagnant, that's become a real problem for some people who cannot afford to live in certain areas where they've lived, their families have lived for many years. And this plan that was put out by this nonprofit, Housing NOLA, last year was seen as an attempt to remedy that problem. And what they're saying in their latest report is that we've called for 3,000 units by 2018. The city has achieved in 1 year about 2,000 of those units, and we applaud them, but there's more work to be done.
So how has the city achieved this?
It's been a combination of, as I mentioned, about $17.3 million in city and federal funding that they've compiled to contribute to this 2,000 units. Other nonprofit groups, affordable housing developers that have stepped up with state and federal money to contribute to that number. it's a combination of groups of efforts of a lot of different groups who've come together to make this a reality.
Now, the mayor actually, though, has a loftier goal even than 3,000 units.
The mayor is aiming for 4,000 units by 2018 and about 7,500 by 2021. And this was a plan that he announced after the Housing NOLA group came out with its initial plan last year. He came out with his in June, says we need to be a little bit more aggressive about moving towards our goals, because in actuality, we really need closer to 33,000 within the next 10 years. But officials are trying to pace themselves. They understand that funding and the resources may not be there.
So is that we're talking about actual construction of new units?
It's a mix. Some units are going to be new. Of the city's 500 or so units that they've contributed, I believe about 180 are brand new. Others are going to be ways that you can basically bring down your electricity bill, or ways that you can keep your standard of living as it is now affordable for you. So that's what's called preserved units. The city is working to help folks who have special needs, for example, modify their homes in ways to where they can more easily use them and keep their bills down. And that would be considered a preserved home unit as opposed to a brand new one. So some of these may be new houses, some may not be.
Is it anticipated that we'll continue to move along at this pace?
The hope is that it will happen that way. And, affordable housing developers and housing advocates are hoping that with the city's budget season coming up this fall, the mayor will continue to make this a priority. He has shown a commitment for this. He's gotten praise from the the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development for his commitment. And, they're hoping that we will continue to see this momentum moving forward.
Okay, Jessica, we'll keep a lookout for that too. Thanks a lot. It's going to go over to Errol right now, and our airport. Some additions and some changes over there.
There are a couple of developments yesterday out of the blue yesterday. Right? One of them was JetBlue celebrated its 15th anniversary in New Orleans, and JetBlue for most of the time has flown between New Orleans and JFK. It added a flight to Boston, but yesterday it also announced that it was adding a daily service to Fort Lauderdale, so that's in a different direction. I can tell you that must be a popular route, because week before last I was in Fort Lauderdale and flew back on Southwest, and they were overbooked, and they were offering people $300 vouchers just to skip the flight plus the cost of their flight. So it would have been like $450. I mean, there's such a demand. But I think what it is the beginning of really trying to develop a hub into the Caribbean, and because JetBlue has added more flights in that direction into the Caribbean and South America. And if you look at JetBlue's destination chart, not necessarily out of Fort Lauderdale, but in terms of the big pictures, that they've got a couple of Cuban destinations on there too. Not Havana, but two other towns. And so you kind of see this positioning of airlines kind of like going in that direction. So New Orleans to Fort Lauderdale will become an important destination. And then a few months ago, we had Copa Airlines, which is out of Panama, started, and its hub, of course, is Panama, but it offers connections through Panama to Latin America and to South America. It used to be, if you were going towards the West Indies, you'd fly American Airlines to Miami to San Juan, and then take some other flight. But you see more service developing, and so that was good news. In all, there are now 15 airlines serving New Orleans and 57 nonstop destinations. It used to be that people would complain the only place you can go nonstop for New Orleans was Atlanta or Houston. But there's a lot of places that you can go, including places you never thought of, like Branson, Missouri. You can go nonstop. And so in that sense, air service is getting a lot better. But at the same time, yes, the director of aviation, Ishtar Ahmad, resigned. Now, there had been rumors of some sort of tension there between him and the mayor's office, but there was nothing in the announcements that confirmed any of that. The mayor's office announcement was essentially a love letter, and Mr. Ahmad's letter was just full of praise for all that they've done. And he was there to get the new expansion going on for the airport, and so that's in progress. Mr. Ahmad is going to develop essentially the Rhode Island airport authority. And so that's going to be an important change. I mean, the aviation director in New Orleans, especially at this time when there's so much construction going on, is a very critical job. But at the rate we're going, I mean, the New Orleans airport is really one of the fastest growing airports. There's a lot of things going on.
Okay, Errol, thanks a lot. It's going to go over to Future Watch and Dawn now, and talking about our winter. What are we looking at? Are we going to have one?
Well, we're going to come off the heels of our summer where we set records at the airport gauge, 43 days where the temperature did not go below 80 degrees. Warm, record-setting summer. That was the closest it ever got to 43 days before this summer was 13 days. So we went from 13 days that it didn't get below 80 to 43 where it didn't get below 80. But now I talked to Barry Keim, the state climatologist, this week, and he said those numbers are going to be called into question because it is the airport gauge and there's a new roadway that has been built right by where that temperature gauge is, so it might be a false high reading. Still, warmer than normal summer, and we're going to have a warmer than normal winter, just like we did last year. But last year was wet and warm. This year's prediction is going to be dry and warm. And part of that is because it's setting up for what may be a La Nina this year, which is when the tropical Pacific waters are cooler than normal. And what that means for us is that we are warm and dry. Warm and dry actually is good in a lot of senses for this region. One, heating bills all but disappear. We might have pleasant weather like we had today, and we won't need to run heat. Below normal rainfall also is good in Baton Rouge, where there will be construction time aplenty for people to be able to rebuild. Sugarcane farming, a dry harvest season is very, very good. It isn't good for the spring growing crops, the strawberries and that sort of thing, if there's parched land that isn't getting the water. It's not good so much for crawfish. It's also not good if we have a warm, dry winter for the Gulf waters to cool off to not be able to fuel hurricanes next year. So
with all the citrus in Plaquemines and St. Bernard Parish, it's good for that.
It's good for that as well.
The fishing might turn on too in December, which fishing for trout on Christmas morning sounds good to me.
Well, hopefully it's not like last Christmas where it was, 85 on Christmas Day. But the entire if you look at a map, the entire southern portion of the nation is going to be warmer than normal or average this winter.
What about the northern portion? Are they really going to get socked hard?
They're not really going to get socked hard. I think, if I remember correctly, it was just the state of Montana that looked like it was going to be colder than normal and wetter than normal. If you looked at the entire map, Montana was the only thing that stood out. So, it won't be as bad as last winter in terms of just the wet, miserable warmth.
We'll have dry warmth, but will we have any winter at all?
Warmer than normal and drier than normal does not mean no winter at all, and it doesn't mean no cold temperatures. It just means if you look at, for purposes of today, I looked at October through December and looked at also November through January. Our typical winter is November through January. So it's just if you average the temperature over those 90 days, is it warmer than average, colder than average? We're going to look at warmer than average, but that doesn't mean you can't throw in some cold days and be able to wear those coats you pull out every couple of weeks.
Never any snow, though.
Too hard to tell at this point.
One can never tell here.
My children are hoping that we see snow, but I know there are plenty of people who aren't hoping for the same. And
your prediction right now doesn't really sound like we're going to have snow.
I'm sorry, I can't deliver better news.
Good news for the Voodoo Fest. Remember last year it got drenched? I mean, it got socked hard. And
so you might have to do where your heating bills might go down, your watering bills might go up
a little bit. Okay, well, we'll wait and see on that one. Let's go back over to Jeremy now, and referring to flood and people having the opportunity to repair their homes from the floods. Some flood relief coming out of Congress.
Yeah, and I guess you could say that the flood relief survived the politics of D.C. because the spending bill had to move fast to avert a government shutdown, and Democrats wanted to make sure that there was money in there for Flint and Michigan to rebuild their water system. Republicans were pushing hard for the flood package, and so we all woke up to headlines this week that there's a $500 million package approved. Everybody's taking credit for it. Everybody's patting each other on the back. They're happy. But not everyone is happy. The congressman from Baton Rouge, Garrett Graves, has some concerns that this package didn't do enough. He's also suggested that it may not actually be as much as $500 million. Meanwhile, you have other folks, aside from the congressman, back in that area who are concerned that the money's not going to show up in time for certain housing deadlines, and that that on the ground in the state that this new flooding recovery group that was seated by the governor has only met once, and there's not already a framework in place for this housing program. And but you know, they're going to get there eventually, and we're going to have to see how it all happens. But a lot of folks are looking at this with some apprehension and wondering what's next.
It's been described as a down payment, almost
Right.
$500 million. So obviously we need a whole lot more. Will that be forthcoming? Are there hopes that there will be more coming down the pike?
I think certainly there is a hope that
Well,
they'll have
a belief, I should say.
yeah,
so
a belief
exists.
that they'll have another shot at this to maybe get attached to another spending bill, or that the president could send something over that they could attach it to. But right now, everybody's just waiting and seeing. You know, we're getting into that point where they're going to be running for re-election more than they're working on the Hill. So
A lot of these congressmen, including both senators, ran for office bashing President Obama. Now that they're in this situation, is there more of trying to make nice with the president?
I mean, you know, it's a different beast up there. I don't think it's going to come to any kumbaya moment. I think there was a lot of bipartisan activity on the state level in presenting this to Congress. But, you know, I guess building on that theme as a way to not answer it directly, but to bring it, you know, I think it did show it. We did learn that it was good to have a governor from the same sitting party as the president. We saw what happened after Katrina, and it seemed like the governor had an open line to the White House, and that certainly helped a lot.
So what kind of plan will there be, or is there anticipated to be, to distribute this money?
Well, that's what this
Anything
new task force has been
So
seated.
there's no plan, no idea at all? Or will it be distributed? I've heard
Oh,
of
it's
community development block grants.
Exactly. Yeah. It's gonna come down in block grants, and this new task force, this flooding task force that's been seated by the governor, is going to determine a way to move forward. Somewhat similar to what we saw with the Louisiana Recovery Authority after Katrina and Rita.
Okay, well, I mean, certainly the hopes are that we will get more than $500 million, because the flood damage estimates have been, about $8 billion or so?
Right.
So we're considerably short. People
We
are
are.
still going to need more assistance. All right, Jeremy, thanks a lot. Okay, back over to Jessica now. We've been hearing about new legislation regarding the age requirements for strippers, and there was state legislation that had been passed. The city had passed legislation even before the state did. But people who are in that industry, some strippers are saying, you are denying me freedom of expression, and so they've sued.
They've sued, and this is important because it is the first lawsuit to come out of this, and this is something that, you know, of course, has been in headlines for at least a year, actually spanning decades before, when the initial age requirement that the strippers be 18 to perform was put into play. But now this is really revved up since we had the sad situation last June of a dancer who was found dead on the interstate by a man that police said was her pimp. And ever since then, there's been a real push to just make sure that the city is doing all that it can legislatively, that state police are doing all that they can with enforcement to make sure that there's not issues of human trafficking in these clubs. And one of the outbursts of that effort was the age requirement. And basically what that said was that in order to dance, you had to be over 21. In order to dance, take off your clothes in an establishment. Now, you could still work there. And what's interesting about the city ban versus the state ban was that the city's ban did not forbid dancers who are currently doing this from doing what they've continued to do. The state ban did. And the state ban, of course, trumps the city's ban. So when the state ban goes into effect, which is actually this coming week, October 1st, several dancers, many dancers, will no longer be allowed to perform. And that's where the lawsuit came from. These dancers are saying that they need this. This is how they pay their bills. This is how they support themselves. And the state is wrong to take that away.
And also, I mean, there is some argument that the plaintiffs are making in this lawsuit, the strippers, that the tie of the age to human trafficking, they argue against that. They say that that's not really relevant.
They actually say it's not really relevant, and they go a step further and say that the ban could actually encourage human trafficking, because dancers who are looking to supplement their income or replace the income that they've lost could be more susceptible to folks that would prey on their ability to dance and perhaps entice them to prostitution. So that's the argument that they've put out. They also argue that it's unfair. The law in itself is written vaguely. They say that it seems to go after female dancers, but doesn't really say much about male dancers and what parts should be exposed on a man versus on a woman. They're arguing several different points. There has not been a response that has been filed in federal court, nor has there been a hearing date. The party who is being sued, which is the state's alcohol and tobacco commissioner, has about 2 months to respond.
So the city law, though, has been in place since the beginning of the year. Is
The
that
city
right?
law, the city ban was put into effect at the beginning of the year, but the state's ban trumped the city ban, and that was placed into effect on October 1st. And the city ban was one that was not as hotly debated, although it did receive a fair amount of discussion because it did protect the dancers who were already there. It said that if you are already working in these establishments, you will not be subjected to these new laws. It's only new dancers who come in. If we hire you, you cannot strip. You have to work as a shot girl or as a bartender, waitress, something to that extent.
So with the state law going into effect October 1st,
October 1st.
tomorrow we're going to see some people have to change their jobs then.
I have talked to club owners who have said that dancers have switched states. They've left because they can no longer work in New Orleans. And the markets in those other states are very different. New Orleans is obviously noted for its adult entertainment. You may not have be able to obtain the same standard of living in, say, a widely populated city such as Austin as you would in New Orleans, which is very specific and noted for that. And, they feel that they have a right to defend their livelihoods, and that's what they're doing.
And is there still discussion going on in terms of within the city about limiting the number of strip clubs on Bourbon?
There is still discussion on that. The City Planning Commission actually passes recommendations to the City Council. The City Council is expected to take that debate up. We may see that happen before the end of the year. However, we are going into budget season, so we'll keep an eye out on when they do move forward with that.
Okay, thanks a lot, Jessica. All right, time to look ahead. Errol.
Well, we'll acknowledge, actually it's kind of looking a little bit to the past, but the death of Terry Fletcher. She was, without a doubt, the first TV star, local TV star, certainly the first local female TV star in New Orleans. Back in the early days of WDSU, which was the first television station in New Orleans, she was known for being the host of the midday show every day, and like anybody who was around the TV watched that. She also had a kids show where she was known as Miss Muffin, and just well known around the community. And again, back at the time when being a TV star was a real novelty and got you to a lot of places. She was married to an artist who was prominent named Leonard Fletridge. Lived in the Marigny area back before that was as popular as it was.
Right.
But she was a real cutting edge and important person. Really,
Very interesting woman. And I actually worked on the midday show when I first started television, so I really learned a lot from her.
And she was 99.
Yeah. Jerry.
Looking even further ahead, after the November elections, there'll be an internal election for the next chairman of the Congressional Black Caucus. Senator Richmond is not only a candidate, but it sounds like he may have this thing sewed up. I think that's a big win for Louisiana, if he does get it.
Don?
Tomorrow, the Coffee with Cops program that meets on Saturday mornings at 4 different McDonald's around the region and offers free coffee and a chance to meet and greet with cops is launching a new program called the Officer of the Month Award. It will provide a $750 scholarship for continued training or leadership training for the Officer of the Month.
Great.
After years of talk and discussion, there is going to be a streetcar on St. Claude Avenue, and we're going to see that rolling into play on Sunday morning. Riders can board for the very first time.
All right, thanks a lot. Thanks you guys for being here. Thank you all for joining us. We'll see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.